Hello and welcome to our CYPA sit downs. My name is Nick Curry. My guest today is Sonya Wysocki-Radenovic. She has worked on several Broadway shows and in the film and television industry in the costume department. Sonya, thanks for joining us today. Now, you have a kind of a personal connection with CYPA. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. My lovely niece Amelia Reap was a student there. Graduated a few years ago. Did a lot of work with the music department, and my nephew will be a student there, I assume, in a couple of years. And he was there as Michael Banks. So
He
in Mary
was. He was
Poppins.
in Mary
So
Poppins.
yeah, Alan. So yeah, so that's my personal connection, and my family is mostly in York, Pennsylvania. So it's not where I grew up, but that's where they live now. So that's where I visit. So
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for agreeing to do this. Can we talk a little bit about your theater background? Like, what was your high school experience in theater? Did you do shows? Did you perform? Were you always interested in costuming?
I grew up in Lewistown, Pennsylvania, and we did not really have um, a theater department so much. There was like an acting class, but at the time, shortly before I got to high school, they just stopped doing musicals. My sister Emily got to do a couple of musicals. She did Oklahoma and Guys and Dolls, but they stopped doing musicals when right about when I started, and then after I graduated, they started up again. So I didn't get the High School Musical experience.
Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible luck with the timing.
It was, yeah. But we had there was a local theater group called the Stone Arch Players. I don't know if they still exist, but I did a little bit of their children's theater with them. But like I had done theater in elementary school and junior high school, and it's like I used to love being on stage, but then I like soon realized I was more concerned about what people were wearing than what I was doing, and so I wasn't really a good actress. so, um, so it was I started heading towards costuming early. So
Yeah. We solicited some questions from some of our students. They wanted to know, like, when did you learn to sew? When did you decide that like costume design was an interest of yours that you wanted to pursue in after high school and as a career?
I learned to sew from my mom. My mom was a junior high and elementary and high school art teacher at various points, and she taught me how to sew, first hand sewing from a very early age. Like as soon as it was safe for me to hold a needle, I like started to learn that, and then probably around high school, like ninth grade or so, I really started sewing with the machine, and I would stay up all night sewing my own clothes. She really preferred for us to sew our own stuff than to buy things, and so I got really into sewing. And also, we had spirit days, and like school spirit days, and so I like wanted all these costumes for myself to wear to spirit days, and my mom very bluntly told me, "says I don't have time to make that. You can make that." So that's like it was, for my own costuming needs.
Out of necessity.
Yeah, I was just like, "Oh, I want this." So we learned how to make it. So yeah, it was fun for me. But I thought, like, almost up until my senior year, I thought that I was going to be an art major, and that's what I had been preparing for. And just prepping to be a painter or an illustrator. And I was trying to do that for, like my whole high school career. And then I went to this thing called Governor School for the Arts, which was a summer program for 6 weeks, and there were 200 actors, artists, dancers, creative writers, musicians, and as part of the theater department, there were these 5 kids who were doing technical theater, and I learned from them. I was like, I don't even know how I met them, but I learned they were like, oh no, we're going, to North Carolina School for the Arts to be technical theater. And I was like, wait, that's a major? You can do that? And I had never heard of that. Like I did not know you could go to school for that. So I started investigating in that, and my dad said, well, why don't you try it for Carnegie Mellon? we have family roots in Pittsburgh, and he was like, well, you just check it out. And I was like, oh, I'm never going to get in there. And so I applied for art and theater at CMU, and I got in. So
Oh, that's
that was
fantastic. Yeah, it's one of those elements that you see a television show or a Broadway musical, and it comes together, and you don't necessarily think, oh yeah, there was thought behind that. Like someone had to create that, envision that, and then design and sew it together. Tell us about your internship at Carnegie Mellon and like what it was like being a costume design major, if anyone's interested in following that route.
It was intense. Being a design major is very intense there. The program is a conservatory program, so you pretty much live and breathe theater. Our classes were in costume history. You for the first couple of years, you even if you're a costume major, you are taught how to uh, scene paint. I had, years of scene painting classes. We have classes in figure drawing. You have classes in drafting, scene design, everything. So you're learning all aspects of theatrical design. And then you do crew, which is so in the daytime you go and you take your classes, starting at 8 a.m. and you go through that. And then in the evening, for most of the year, you're doing crew, which is like whatever show, and it could be a show on the main stage, or it could be a show in the studio theater. It could be show that you just decided to do. You're working on either the costumes or the scenic elements of it, and that's for 6 weeks, and you work 3 hours a night, and you put the show together. So we had to do a lot of things, and then in my senior year, the summer before my senior year started, I had a teacher call me and say, there's a woman who's looking for an intern in New York City. Do you want to go? And I was like, yeah. So I got to go to New York for 3 months and be a theatrical milliner. And that's someone who makes hats for Broadway shows. And we worked on Tommy. We worked on a show called She Loves Me, which was beautiful little period hats. She did a show called Abe Lincoln in Illinois, which was a drama show. And it was amazing. And the woman I interned for, Lynn Mackey, is still in business. And she just taught me how, like all about New York and how to shop in New York and where to go for things. And so I was like much less afraid. So as soon as I graduated, I moved to New York. So, because I wasn't afraid. So it was good. So.
It's good to have somebody there to kind of walk you through the process. I know a lot of our students have expressed an interest to say, well, if you know somebody who wants to move to NYC and make it, like, what are the tips? And it sounds like get connected with somebody who can kind of show you the ropes.
Yeah, it definitely helped. And it's just like, it was even harder because it was early 90s. But we didn't really have the internet. It wasn't truly up and running, so you couldn't just check a website. There was a theatrical resource book that you looked in for addresses, and it was very old school with like just looking at places and pounding pavement to get a job. I handed out my resume to I think 9 different costume shops, and one called me back. So I was like, woohoo! It's like it was tough, and I lived in an apartment with 4 other girls, and that was your first year.
That had to be many stories from that experience. Were they also working in the industry, or just you all went your separate ways?
No, they were students at Cooper Union University, and I found them through the way we used to find apartments was looking in the Village Voice at the apartment rent sublets and things like that. And it was, just it was really hard. You just made phone calls and made phone calls until someone picked up the phone and helped you get an apartment. So that was the cheapest way to do it then.
Sure.
It's different now with Craigslist. But it was intense. So
after your internship, you stay in New York City. How do you get connected to Broadway? What's your in?
Well, my first real job when I graduated I was working for a costume shop called Izquierdo Studios. And they did all kinds of things. They did. They had one floor of the shop was like fine sewing, and really nice stuff. And then I worked on the craft floor because I had craft skills. And we would build things, like we would build displays and things for shop windows. Like we worked for like I did some windows for Bloomingdale's, and like we would build like window displays, and we would build all sorts of stuff. So that's where my scenic work came in handy. And but then we were doing like crazy craft costumes for Vegas and all sorts of stuff. And while I was working there, met this woman named Stacy. And she said, "Oh, they're looking for swing dressers up at Miss Saigon." And a swing dresser is someone who comes in as a temp, basically. And so, like a Broadway show will have a crew of dressers, and then the swings are the people who work part time, and they're not. You learn different what's called tracks, and I can explain more about dresser tracks in a minute. And you fill in when someone is sick or someone has a day off. And at the holidays, like theater gets really busy because there's a Christmas show and, the Radio City Music Show, and they used to do one down at Madison Square Garden. And so there's more activity at the holidays. And so they frequently need like extra help to fill in, for people taking vacations, if people get sick or whatever. So she said, "Oh, they need help at Miss Saigon." And I didn't go for it right away. And it's like, cause I was like, "Oh, I'm busy at the shop here." And then a few months later, I was like, "I wonder if I should check that out." So in May of 1995, I sent my I sent my resume to this wardrobe supervisor and just dropped it off cold at the stage door, and said, this woman gave me your name, and I wasn't in the union yet or anything. So it's a little trickier when you're not in the union and you just like sign up. But this supervisor had like a reputation of hiring people who were non-union, who were young. So because she liked people who could run fast. So she hired me. And then, and so I worked there for 6 months, and then she gave me an opportunity to go on tour with Les Miserables. They needed someone who could sew. And since I was young and I didn't really have a lot of connections in New York, I could just basically drop everything and go. I took the job. So best decision.
That's pretty incredible. Just you were in the stage of your life when you could take an opportunity like that, and you took it.
Yeah.
We were talking before the interview started. A lot of the questions that came in were about costume design, which was your major, but there are so many more roles within the industry. Can you give us like a brief interview of like what's the hierarchy there? What's like the day-to-day like in the costume world in that whole department?
Sure. In theater, I'll talk about theater first, and then we can talk about TV. So in theater, there is a costume designer, and usually that person has an associate who is an assistant, but kind of a little higher up, like, probably a more experienced designer, who has a little more organizational skills, a little more, and it's just like almost a designer, but not quite. And then there will be a couple of costume assistants. And then the designers do what's called bidding out the show after it's all designed, and that involves lots of meetings with producers and directors, and you talk about concepts and whatever. So the designers will design the show, and then they bid out the show to different costume shops. And there are like, I don't even know how many costume shops there are in New York anymore, because some have opened, some have closed. But the shops will bid on, like, say, like, I want to do the costumes for this particular number, and it's tons of things and, hats and whatever. So they'll say, I want to do this. And they will send in a bid for that, see what they do. And then the show gets jobbed out to different costume shops. And and then the actors will go to fittings and things there at the costume shop with the designers. And, it's a lot of work. And, production can take months and months and months and months in theater. So then, while that's happening, I think it's usually the, certain costume designers will have wardrobe supervisors that they like to work with. But then sometimes the wardrobe supervisor actually picked up by the management company and say, like, we like to work with this person. They're really good with budgeting. A lot of wardrobe supervisor is about budgeting and about being efficient. And how they can manage the crew. So the wardrobe supervisor gets hired. Wardrobe supervisor has assistants, usually one for a small show, usually. And then if it's a larger show, they'll have more. Like on Lion King, there's a wardrobe supervisor. He currently has 2 assistants. And then there's a whole puppet department, which takes care of the masks and all the mechanical costumes. There's a puppet supervisor. And that person has like a team of people. So after the assistants, then there are what's called dressers on Broadway. And a very large Broadway show can have as many as, like, I think we had 16 dressers on Spider-Man.
Wow, that's a lot.
16. It was a huge crew. I think it's 13 on Lion King, possibly 14. And then, you know, so that's the full-time crew. That's just what it takes to run the show. And there's always an argument. Producers want you to do it with less, fewer dressers, you know, because it's, you know, it's more money, or if you have more money.
It is a business. Yeah, it's
Right.
show business. Yeah.
So, and then in addition to the dressers, there's usually what they call a stitcher on Broadway. And then there might be an extra laundry person. And part of the running is, sure, it's like you're running the show at night, but in the daytime you have what's called day work. And that is doing the laundry, doing the pressing, doing the repairs. You know, things break down, and they use the costumes for a long time on Broadway, as long as possible, because it's expensive to replace it. It takes ages to get the Broadway costumes, and they will just use it and use it and use it as long as possible. So you wash it, you fix it, you patch it. A lot of stuff doesn't show up. On Lion King, we were painting constantly, patching, things get broken. And sometimes you slap a temporary repair on it, and then you send it back out again, and it has to finish the show. So
one of the questions that came in asked about, like, maybe what the hardest piece that you ever made or worked on, or maybe it's a tricky repair to something that was ornate.
I had a hard time with that one too, because there have been a lot of tricky costumes. When we were doing production on Spider-Man, there were a lot of things which, you know, they had designed and created in the shops, but then, like, things like, you know, didn't work the way they thought they would. And that's common. It's just like, sometimes, you know, it's like you have a concept, but until you get it on stage, you don't know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And some of the stuff just hadn't been made. And so we had to create some stuff while we were there. And it was very, very hard. There were some puppets that, like, we were just trying to figure out how to make. There was a scene where there were these spiders, like, that, like, they came off the actress would stand in the middle, and then there were 4 puppet legs that came off of her, and she, like, the dancer would operate it with, like, these little puppet strings, and those had not been made when the show came into production. And we got parts for them sent from Canada, and we were making them in the lobby, and those were really hard. And then the whole number got cut. So it's just like, after we finally figured it out, the whole thing, they just ditched it. And that's very common. There was a question on there about, have you ever seen a costume that just doesn't work on stage? And it's like, yes, that happens all the time. And one time in college, I had designed this whole idea about the color this guy was going to wear. And he got up on stage, and he looked too good. He was supposed to be like this sort of weak and meek guy. And just because, like, who the person was, like, the actor, it's just like, he was a good looking guy. And it's just like, he looked too good. And I was like, well, we got to change that. It's like, he doesn't look like what he's supposed to look. It's like, sometimes you think of things and it's like, well, that worked in my head, but that doesn't work on stage. So you change it, and as fast as possible.
Or until you see what the conditions are in terms of, like, how it's lit, because, like, the color of light that's selected can really alter what your perception of the color of the fabric or the texture.
Yeah. Until you see it all together, it's a totally different thing. So
another question was, What show did you work on that you think really just had outstanding costumes, or just costumes you really loved working on?
I would definitely say Lion King. I mean, they were so innovative for that. It was, it's like nothing else. And it was, that's the show, Broadway show I worked on the longest, I think, because I did 5 years with that. And they were so beautiful, and I had so much fun like painting and maintaining. And it's just like I got to be really crafty on that one. And they were they were really beautiful. They still are beautiful. It's still one of the best design shows, I think. Um,
That show really
so
was like a turning point in terms
mhm,
of Broadway, and not only what they did for, is it the New
yeah,
Amsterdam? Like, in that
yeah,
the whole renovation,
yeah.
reviving that part of the town, making it more family friendly.
Yep, yep. It was really a big thing, and very glad that I was there for that. I wasn't part of the original company, but I came in a year after it opened. Actually, that's what I left tour to do because I was hearing about this show and I was like, I want to go work on that. And so I went back, and it was a few months before was able to get a job on it, but I'm really glad I did. So it was a good experience. As far as TV, I love the costume for Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Like you go into work and it's a lot of vintage and things like that. But I've worked in the costume shop on that one. And that's a whole team of people doing fittings for background actors and sewing and just creating and working. That is a monster show. It's so impressive, like how much work goes into that. And the designer is very, very particular. And and she's right, it's just like when you look at it, it's so beautiful. Every aspect is gorgeous. And, I get to handle all these beautiful clothes. And it's like, I really like that for TV.
That's cool. Somebody wanted to know if there was a TV show or a musical that you wish you could be an actor in. Did you ever have that
No.
moment where you wish to be on stage?
No. I, I learned a long time ago. It's just like, I'm really not an actress. Nope. The amount of work that professional actors put in, it's just like, you have to love it to be willing to subject yourself to like, uh just to subject yourself to like judgment all the time, be like, oh, it's like when I was trying to do community theater, I auditioned for a role and I was 16 and the character was 16, and they were like, you look too young. And I was like, okay, I'm this age. Like this is 16 for me. I'm like, yeah, okay. So it's just like, and I was like, I don't want to live my life like that. Oh, you're too young, you're too old, you're too this, you're too that, or like we decided to go in a different direction. And it's just like, okay, it's just like, that's so mean. Like, I'd rather just work. So
I think it's good for our students to hear that it's okay to want to be a part of theater and know that being on stage is not the role for
yeah,
you.
yeah,
That
it's
there's
definitely.
lots of in the background and other opportunities to be a part of that. What was it like being part of a Broadway company? Like, how did you interact with the other departments and the actors and the musicians?
It's fun. Broadway is definitely a family, and TV shows are too. But with Broadway, there is a very large community because you're working and you're usually on about the same schedule. Broadway, it's pretty set hours. It's like you do your day work usually from like 12 to 5 or 1 to 5, and then you have a dinner break until 6:30, and then you start your pre-show, and then you're probably going to be out by 11 o'clock or so. So it's a very set schedule, and most of the shows are on roughly the same schedule. It doesn't, there's some variation, but it's about the same. And so people get together and we do a lot of charity events. There's a charity called Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, and they raise millions of dollars every year for different AIDS related charities and uh, just health organizations, and they do a lot of work, and there's always a benefit. Like people are really involved with like doing benefits and doing the community of it, and they go to each other's shows and like just like, oh, they do a toy drive, and there's a huge community involved with that. And that's lovely. And it's just like, that is the one thing that I miss about working in television, because it's like the people are lovely. I love the people I've worked with on shows are just like a huge family. um too, but because you don't tend to see people who work on other shows as much because their hours are different, or it's like it's a little less like that, and it's just like, and you're working all the time in TV. It's just like the hours are a little crazy. And so I can explain more about that. So
Well, no, that's a great segue. So what were the factors that made you say, I want to start a new chapter and move from live theater to working in television? And then the other questions, like the main differences and what it's like doing television with a theater background.
They I had done a little bit of TV and stuff involved in like what they call shop work. And I had worked on a couple of movies in Philadelphia as a in sewing costumes and things like that. There were a couple of M. Night Shyamalan movies that filmed down there, and they needed extra sewers. So I went down and worked as a stitcher a couple of times, and I was like, this is really fun. And so when Spider-Man closed, I thought like, well, I could try to get another job as an assistant supervisor. And then I was like, but I wasn't excited about any of the shows. And I was like, Hamilton wasn't out yet. So, but there were, I just wasn't like, I wasn't really excited. I was like, I want to try TV and film. And at that time, there was a lot more TV work was really ramping up. And so they needed more in theater or in TV, it's called a costumer, people who work on the day-to-day of the show, as helping the actors get ready. And so I started first as what's called an aider dyer. And that is someone who like you do distressing and things like that. And making clothes dirty or kind of making special things. So that tied into the painting. And so I started doing that. I had a friend who did that, and she's like, hey, I need a little help on this project. So that sort of got me like into it. And then I had a friend who I had worked with on Spider-Man, and she said, hey, do you want to try to be a set costumer? And I said, okay. So, and that is the people who, like in my case, I work with background actors. And, so it's like you have a restaurant scene, you got your main actors, but then all the people who are behind them in the restaurant, that's the people I take care of. And I actually find like you do something that's closer to designing when you're working with background, because our designers will give us notes, and they will have some costumes pulled, but the background actors bring their own clothes, and we have to make decisions in the morning. It's like 6:00 in the morning and there's a restaurant scene. You are making decisions about like, oh, you can wear this, you can wear that, you can wear this. And, and it's, and then you line everybody up and you have to see how everyone looks. And if somebody jumps out, if so like somebody is, doesn't look right, you have to redress them. And so you're designing quickly, very quickly, like within like 45 minutes or an hour, you have to design what those people look like for that scene. And so it's intense. And, unfortunately, I work with some really good designers who are very clear about what they want, and that's helpful. And so we know what we should do and what we shouldn't do. That there was a question about color that was very interesting, and about using color. And it's interesting because in theater, a lot of times you will dress people in a similar color for a big musical number, like all the ensemble, like you use color to unify the actors and create a look. But in television, if you're doing background actors, or even you don't want all of your principal dressers or principal actors wearing a blue shirt. It looks funny. And it's just like if every guy in the office is wearing a navy suit and a blue shirt, it looks weird. Or you have to be really, really careful about like not making twins. And because it looks funny. And there are certain colors that we're not allowed to use, like don't use bright white. It's going to glare. Don't use red almost ever, unless it's a very specific thing. avoid red, because it will, for background actors, it's going to pull focus. You have a red spot in the background, people are going to look there and not at your principal actors. And so there are a lot of things you have to watch out for. Very small checks when you work on television, small checks, small plaids, herringbone, because it creates an effect. And you'll see it sometimes on the news. Someone comes on and like a herring, and it shimmers, and so
Yeah,
you
was
can't.
that Moray or something like that? Or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And so you have to be really, really careful about that. Tiny polka dots, So, and it's funny. It's just like you learn very quickly about like, oh, that color doesn't work. This color looks good.
In
Um,
television, how much of it is like go to the big wardrobe and like pull this and this, or like quick make something, or if they bring their own stuff?
we don't usually make things, but the designers will usually pool. Like if you're working on location, the designers will pool costumes, and then they're like, "Oh, we have like this one rack, and there's a rack of like women's blouses, women's suits, dresses, pants, and then like menswear and whatever." And so those are options. And so if somebody comes in and what they've brought is terrible, and it's just like, it happens. Not everybody has, like, background actors don't make that much money. They might not have a wardrobe. And so they will, we give them clothes. And sometimes it's just like, oh, here's this blouse. And sometimes it's um, an entire outfit. Like, wow, wow. You
Start
really
from
got
scratch
that
on this one.
wrong. It's like,
Is does texture play a different role when you know that things are going to be ready for high definition camera versus from the back of a theater? Do you think about that? We talked about color. I didn't know if you looked at textures in a different way between live theater and television.
I think I don't think about, like, it depends on the show. Like, generally, most things are, just it's seasonal, it's ready to wear, you just have to dress appropriately for the season. And in TV, it's, just like, oh, you wouldn't pick something woolly if it's going to be summer, because yeah, it will show up a little more. So I guess, like, I guess so. It's just like, it's more pattern and things like that. Like really big patterns are going to be great in theater, but not so great on TV. Pattern, color. You don't want shiny things on TV. Like really shiny usually is a no. Like, so, but that might be great for Broadway. So
What are the differences with on a Broadway show? You're working with the same costumes every day in, day out, and like maintaining them versus in television where I don't know that Mrs. Maisel has ever worn the same outfit twice. In what are we on, season 3 or?
right. Yeah, it's there are uh that is one of the big differences. Yeah. It's like you are changing, and it's just like you change every day, you change every episode. Um and it's a lot of dry cleaning. It's a lot of like, swapping things over. For background, sometimes, we there are things that we definitely reuse from episode to episode, and we try to, like, I worked on elementary for 5 years, and we would like try to bury something if we'd used a lot. We'd bury it, because it's like you don't want to see the same files popping up all the time. And the uh so we would, wash it and dry clean it. But then if something had shown up too much, we would like retire it. Be like, that, no, it's like we've been using that blouse for 3 seasons. Get it out of here.
It
Um,
becomes its own character, secondary
yeah,
character in the show
it's
or
like,
something like
we're
that.
like, that's the hardest working person show business. Like, get it out of here. So, uh, but yeah, it's just like you do try to keep it fresh. And one of the things in television you have to watch out for is continuity, because TV shows are filmed out of sequence. And so you have your script days, which are, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5 of an episode. And you won't necessarily film the scenes. You might go from day 4 to day 1 in one, in one shooting day. Because like when you're on a location, we're like, well, we have to shoot everything for this location today, but there are 3 different script days for that. So part of the job of a set costumer and the wardrobe supervisor is to be very specific about like making sure that like this person is in their day 1 costume, this that now we were in day 3 now, and it's like you set the costume in the actor's room. You are, making sure that that person is wearing it the same way. And we have an app that we use for this called Sync on Set. It used to be done with Polaroid photos in the old days. And it was just like you'd carry around like a big chunk of Polaroid photos and a Polaroid camera and write notes by hand about like, this is what this person was wearing. This is how it was worn. The shirt was untucked, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
And
this button was buttoned. This is where it's unbuttoned. Yeah.
And so now we have an app, which is so much easier. And you can share information with like other costumers and your supervisor almost immediately. It's way easier. And so people would just like, you have to pay attention to that. That's a really big thing because when it's wrong, you know it's wrong. It's like, ooh.
You're walking that balance of, especially with the background stuff, helping people stay in the moment, that it doesn't draw focus because it's either too flashy or because it's wrong. There's like
Right.
interesting middle ground, I'm sure, with that.
Right. I have to make it interesting. I have to make it visually interesting, but not too interesting. And I always say it's just like, if I do my job right, you should never know what I've done. It's like really shouldn't be noticed. It's very subtle, and because it's like you don't want to be people like, who put that guy in a red hat? Eee! So it's sometimes the actors are sneaky. They want to shine a little on camera, and so they'll like pop on a pair of sunglasses, or or sometimes they're just sleepy and they don't know, so they're like, I've just decided to put my hood up. Were we rolling? Yes you were. So
I've heard that about actors.
Yeah, they can be a little sneaky sometimes. It's like, no, you cannot wear that. And it's like, oh well, I thought no, nope, don't don't do that. That's not what you had on last time.
Yeah. The last couple questions we have are about like making connections within the industry and advice. One of the things that I heard you say that you could talk a little bit more about was a varied background, like your craft work playing a role in other jobs that you've done in terms of making sure that your theater background is varied.
Yeah, I think that is definitely one of the things that has helped me stay employed. I feel like the more skills you develop, the better chance you have of making, of being employed, because you can adapt, what you've learned to all different scenarios and be like, oh, I can paint that. I can do that. So I would, it's not bad to be focused, but don't limit yourself too much. It's just like learn as much as you can about as many topics, and and try new things, like especially when you're in your early 20s and things like that. Just like try stuff and see how that goes, because you might learn something new that could be useful later. It's just like I use skills that I learned on my millinery internship all the time, even though I'm not a milliner. It's just like, techniques she taught me, I use that now. So I will say, is like growing contacts. I did have, I definitely had an advantage in that I went to a school with a theater program, and and through that I met people who then led to meeting other people. Because I worked at that costume shop, I met a dresser who got me into that job. And most of the jobs I've gotten have not been on my resume. It's because of friends that I made while I was working on such and such show. You meet someone who is working on the next show, and then they recommend you. Most jobs get hired that way. Most supervisors will hire someone that someone on the crew knows over a cold person. I don't know. And it's just like, it's So that's kind of important, which leads me to like my advice for working is show up on time. Oh, be prompt, show up on time, be reliable, and don't be a jerk. Like, like really, like you don't have to be everybody's best friend. I'm definitely not. But like, don't gossip and don't be rude. Just if something is definitely wrong, you should, say something, but, just don't be rude. Because Broadway's it's a big community, but it's a small community. And if you get a reputation as being difficult, people don't want to work with you because you're going to spend a lot of time around other people. And they want to be around someone they like working with, so it's just like be cool. Like just yeah, so
That is so true in so many, I mean, any profession is that it's the connections that you make, it's that human element that if you are somebody that people want to work with, you're going to get that phone call. If you're somebody that's difficult to work with, it's not worth it unless you have, it's that balance of like you need to be really really good to justify being difficult to work with.
yeah, because there's always going to be someone else coming along, so it's just like yeah.
One other funny question that we got that I thought we would ask you was, have you ever cosplayed? And it made me
um,
chuckle because I've seen some of the work that you've made for your family members. I don't know. You said you made your own stuff at school growing up.
I well, like cosplay wasn't really a thing so much when I was in high school. Although if it had been, I probably would have. And mostly what I have done, like I do a lot of Halloween costumes for myself. And I really have a good time. When I worked at elementary, like we actually had a costume competition every year. And so we would dress up at work and then people voted on the best costume. And so I really enjoyed that. And yeah, I love the whole idea of cosplay. I think it's a really great way for people to work on their skills, and it's like I love that community. It's just like it's not something I've done so much, but I think it's wonderful. I love it when Comic-Con is happening in New York because there are people on the train and they're just dressed up and loving it. And I think it's a marvelous way for people to develop skills. It's like you have to do some crazy crafty stuff for that. And there's all kinds of new materials and techniques. And I think it's awesome. So I
That's
would definitely
fantastic.
do that.
Sonia, thank you so much for doing the sit down with us and sharing your insight with me and with our students. Is
Oh,
there
you're welcome.
anything is there anything that like we didn't cover that you're like, oh, these students
There
definitely
was,
need to know this?
yeah, there was one question about the differences between working in theater and working in television. Um, and I would number one say the hours are very, very different. Um, and the in theater, your hours, if you're working on Broadway, you're going to be working 6 days a week, but the hours are definitely more set. You generally have your mornings off, except for on weekends. Um, and you will start your day work at this time, it will be dinner break at this time, you're gonna go back to work at this time, your show will end at this time, and it's like you pretty much know your schedule. It's like you're gonna know that. And but it's going to be consistent, and you're going to work holidays and you're going to work weekends, and that's definitely a thing that didn't matter so much to me when I was in my 20s, but as I got older, I was like, I'd like to not work weekends anymore. It's kind of a bummer. And so in television, you work crazy hours during the week. And so, it's like you can start your Monday at 3 o'clock in the morning, getting up and getting to work, putting on a bunch of layers. Sometimes you will be sitting out on a cold sidewalk, and it's harsh, and you can work 14 or 16 hours a day. It's very long. You are compensated for your overtime though, so that's a plus.
That is a bonus, getting
And then
paid.
sometimes Friday goes into Saturday. We have what's called Fraturday, So you might get home at 2 and 3 in the morning, dawn on Saturday. That can happen. And then you have to sleep fast because you're going to go back to work on Monday. But you get 2 weeks off at Christmas, at least. And then if you're working on a show that only films for 6 months, then you have a break and you can go on a nice vacation. So and sleep. And so it's crazy. It's very intense. And the hours are very long in television, but it's the payoff is that you get better breaks. I get to see my family at Christmas now, and that didn't used to happen for years. That didn't. I would have 1 day off, 1.5 days off at Christmas, and then back to work. You know,
Back to work. That's
now
how it goes.
now I have a holiday like a real person. So
Congratulations on your holiday.
thank you. So now we're all on holiday. So
Yeah, we are. We are something wherever we are right now.
yeah, if anybody else has any any more questions, they can get in touch with me through you, I guess.
Absolutely.
Just like I'm always happy to give whatever like a little advice. Like
Thank you so much.
all right, thank you, bye.